everybody. In this video we're going to be looking at altered states of consciousness. We've already talked about dreaming, which is certainly one of the major ones, but there are a lot of other ways that people can alter their consciousness, meaning they wind up having changes in terms of how they take in information or how they perceive information. We're not going to discuss all of them in this video. So for example, we're not going to talk about hypnosis, meditation, spiritual trances, and so on. But we are going to talk about some others. And the first one I wanted to discuss is hallucinations. And most people, when they think of hallucinations, they either associate it with schizophrenia or with drugs such as LSD. And that certainly is one way to hallucinate, although not the only ones. But the definition of a hallucination is that it's a realistic perceptual experience with no external cause. So a person is either seeing, hearing, smelling, or feeling something that is not there. And they're actually more common than most people think. Surveys show, depending on which study you look at, that somewhere between 10 and 40% of people have hallucinated at least once in their life. And one by itself, I mean, it's not good, but it's not necessarily a massive sign of anything hugely wrong unless it happens on an ongoing basis. So it can be caused by mental illness, so psychotic illnesses such as schizophrenia, but also by hallucinogenic drugs, but also high fever, sensory deprivation. So there are all sorts of things that can lead to hallucinations. So that's one example of an altered state of consciousness. Two more would be out-of-body and near-death experiences. Okay, so what happens with both of these is that research shows that they seem to be due, frankly, just to a scrambling of sensory information. So the person is basically just misunderstanding like what's going on. Usually this is happening, they are severely injured, they're under anesthesia, something is already not normal about the way that their body is functioning. And certainly when we look at near-death experiences, there is huge variation across cultures. So if you look at the picture down there on the bottom right, we see the scene that a lot of us associate with near-death experiences, right? This person walking toward a bright tunnel of light that they frequently interpret as being heaven. But this is something that you pretty much only see among people who believe in a Christian heaven. So if you get people from religious backgrounds that don't believe in heaven, they usually don't get this. They may or may not report seeing a light, but they don't interpret it as a tunnel walking toward a light, walking toward a heaven. People will sometimes report that at the end of this light that they see loved ones, that they see God. Again, this is something that you pretty much only see when someone already believes in a God or believes that they will meet loved ones in an afterlife. Okay, and there are other biological ways to trigger this. Certainly, oxygen deprivation is a big one. Okay, and so what all of this boils down to is that all other things being equal, there's no good reason to go with a complicated explanation when a simple one will do. Okay, so first of all, as far as falsifiability goes, there actually has been research with out-of-body experiences where people will give very detailed explanations of what they saw, say during surgery, but what they describe does not fit with what was actually in the room at the time. So they may be hallucinating it, they may be perceiving it, they may be coming up with a story, and we're not talking about deliberate lying here, but they may be coming up with a story without realizing that they're just piecing together other stuff that they have seen and heard. And certainly with something like the tunnel, the question of what happens when we die. Is there a God? Is there a heaven? What do you have to do to get to this heaven? Those are metaphysical questions. We can't answer that through science. We cannot prove, is there a God, is there a heaven? And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that there is or there isn't. That's, ultimately a question of faith. But on the other hand, if we know that we can induce this kind of sensory experience through oxygen deprivation, then all other things being equal, scientifically speaking, we're better off going with that explanation than with something that is more complicated that we cannot prove. So we talked about hallucinations, out-of-body and near-death experiences, and the last thing that I want to talk to you about today is psychoactive drugs. And so we've got Bart Simpson up there with his beer, because it's good stuff. And a psychoactive drug is any substance that's going to act on your brain and affect your emotional or mental states. So this can include illegal drugs. It can include legal recreational drugs, so beer, cigarettes, anything like that. Caffeine is a psychoactive drug, and it's legal even for kids. And it can also include substances that someone takes for a legitimate medical reason, but that still might affect the way they process information. So an example is if you've ever taken cold medication or allergy medication, and you get kind of slow. Some people report that they just feel kind of in a fog. They've got a good reason for taking that drug, but it is still affecting their mental state. And so a couple of things to keep in mind about psychoactive drugs. One is, where do we draw that line between use or abuse? And in the DSM, the more formal name is substance use disorder. But that is the big question. Is it just about the amount of a drug you consume? Is it about which ones? So there are some people that will say, you know what, if it's an illegal drug, then using it even once, that should count as abuse. There are a lot of opinions on this. But the way that we define this in the mental health community is to look at the level of impairment or distress that a drug is causing a person. So it's not just about how much of a drug do you use, but how much is it affecting you? What's the context? So for example, I am over 21 years of age. If I want to sit there and have 3 shots of vodka at night, I'm going to get kind of drunk, but it's not going to kill me. Right? It's not going to cause me distress. Under the right circumstances, I might enjoy it. But if I do those same 3 shots of vodka while I'm driving to the college in the morning, this is now really a problem. This has got the potential to significantly affect my health and other people's health. So, it's not just the amount, but the time. Or am I drinking 3 drinks over the course of 6 hours versus pounding 3 shots at one time? And obviously, I'm a small woman. 3 drinks is going to have a much bigger effect on me than it might on another person. So we're going to look at the degree. Is it affecting somebody's grades, their social relationships, their physical health, their ability to hold a job, any of those types of things. Other things that we can look at when we're talking about where we draw that line between substance use versus abuse is the person developing a significant tolerance for a drug? So are they needing more and more of the drug to get that same effect? And or are they developing withdrawal? So are they going through physical symptoms when use is stopped or reduced? And this can happen with illegal drugs, but it can happen with legal drugs. Certainly caffeine and tobacco and alcohol, all 3 can lead to some pretty unpleasant withdrawal symptoms. And it can also occur with medications. So certainly there are certain medications where people will develop a tolerance and they'll go through withdrawal when the drug is taken away. I also don't have it on this slide, but we can also look at psychological dependence. So even if a person is not physically going through withdrawal, are they just not feeling right when they can't get their drug? Okay, so something like marijuana, the risk of physical addiction is pretty much nil, but you get people who have psychological dependence. This starts taking over their life, and they don't feel normal when they're not using marijuana, and they're spending more and more of their time thinking about when will I get to do it next and how will I obtain it. So even if they're not having physical withdrawal, they can still be diagnosed with substance use disorder. So that's it for this. If you have any questions, please call me or email me. Otherwise, I hope you all have a wonderful day.